delight to be here. My name is Susan Johnson, and boy, I would come to the school several times a year before the pandemic, and I just really miss that. I gave my first lecture back with parents here at Live Oak back in March, and I don't know if any of you were at that one, but we all had like masks sort of tucked in our pockets, wondering if we needed them or not, depending if anyone felt sick or was sick. And there were just 5 of us. So we made a little intimate little circle, and it was really nice. So, but here I get to be back and share with you the important things that I am still learning about my own journey as a parent, my own journey with my son, who of course is now 28 and is now married, and it's amazing. It helps to keep learning, because the things that I did as mistakes, I'm hoping I won't do them now with the grandchildren, because mistakes are such a great way to learn. And I have learned so much by all the mistakes I've made. But I wanted to share tonight why Waldorf. And I'm going to talk about it philosophically, because I know there's some families that can't find a Waldorf school. Sometimes they can't afford them right now, just the way all the financial things are going if it's a private school. There aren't as many public Waldorf schools. And so I want families to also feel empowered that these are the principles, whether you're homeschooling, wherever your child might be going, this is where you can fill in. But to me, these are the principles of Waldorf education that my son and myself got to experience. And I realized during that time, because he started actually in preschool, at a Waldorf-inspired preschool, and at that time, I think he would have been labeled as either the labels of attention deficit disorder, because he couldn't hold still, but he also had all these developmental delays in his fine motor and his balance and stillness. His balance was great when he would move his muscles, as if the motor system told him where his body is. But if you asked him to be still or to try to sit still, it was impossible. He had no idea where his body was unless it was moving. And I watched him heal during those preschool years. I took in all that information from the teachers, who I realized knew far more about child development than I did. And I had all this training. I had done even a whole 3-year fellowship just in behavior and developmental pediatrics. But what they taught me was, it ended up being sort of common sense, but I think I'd lost my common sense. But they also helped me slow down my whole being so that I could start to understand what this healing process was all about. So that then he could continue with an amazing teacher who was where was it? It was in South Africa, but her name was Teacher Najiri. And her requirement to even take my son, because at that time he pretty much had to be held by the teacher or he would run off still. He was better from preschool, but there were still issues going on. But she had me volunteer as a requirement in the kindergarten, and I thought she just wanted a pediatrician in the kindergarten because it looked good. But no, that was not why. Because when I went to the first parent meeting, there was just something, the other parents all seemed, I would call it, more present than I was. And I would have said I was present. It's just that I would talk a mile a minute. My head would be spinning and I'd fly from one subject to another. And I don't think I made such good eye contact, because that's what I noticed with these other parents, especially the ones that had already been with this teacher for a whole year. And what I realized is that she was teaching me where that present moment place was. And she couldn't explain it to me, and I don't think I would have listened to her. I would have told her I was present. But it was very interesting coming that first day in the kindergarten with Teacher Najiri, Kenya, that's where she's from, because I thought I was going to play with the children. I thought I was going to roll on the ground. I was going to do green light, red light, green light games. And instead, she had me come in and she handed me a big wooden spoon, and she had this big pot of oatmeal on the stove. And she said, I need you to stir the oatmeal. I go, well, okay. I thought, that's why I don't make oatmeal like this from scratch. I do the instant one, but okay, I'll stir it. During that whole morning, especially those first 2 hours, I was still stirring oatmeal, and she would come over and turn it off, then turn it on low, the heat, then back to off. And I thought, after 5 minutes, I thought I was going to die in the kindergarten. I thought, oh my gosh. I'd look at the clock and it's like, oh my gosh, only 5 minutes has gone by? Only 10 minutes has gone by? It was excruciating. And I had said I would do this once a week. And so I went home and I had a plan. I wasn't coming on oatmeal day. I was going to switch to a different day. So I came back, I had a great elaborate excuse. And she said, that's fine. You could come on that different day. And so then I come and it's millet day. And guess what I get? The big spoon. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, the only thing I did that I would do the rest of the day is she always would take the children for a walk. And she told me that she wanted me, in the back of the line, way behind the children, because of course I would have whole conversations with them and be pointing everything out on the way that they saw, because that's what I would do with my son. But way in the back, where I couldn't say anything, and my job was to make sure that they stayed on the trail or stayed on the sidewalk. But you could feel that teacher's presence all the way to the back of the line. I never had to say anything to the children. And what was amazing about those walks, unlike me that would put words to everything, especially because my son was delayed in speech, and I thought, so he needed more speech. But she would sometimes just stop and walk, look up in the sky, see the white moon is what she was looking at in the middle of the day, and wait. And then another child would suddenly say, or a child would say, oh, the moon. And then all the children would be looking. And another one might say, oh, it's round. And then more pause, and on she would go. And so that whole experience, it was just so different for me. But again, that stirring the millet was excruciating. So I decided to switch one more day. And I was going to switch to a different day. And she said, fine, you could switch to a different day. Well, it was soup day. And I actually got my first variety of a task when I came in. But she wanted to check me out first. So she said, we're going to be cutting up the vegetables that the children brought. And I'd like to just, here's a knife, and just to see, why don't you cut one of the carrots right now without the child yet being here. I mean, she didn't say it that way. Well, I sit there cutting the carrots like I normally do, where my mind is off somewhere else, and I'm not at one at all with that carrot. And she would look and she'd just give this smile. It was almost laughing with me. And then she would gently take a knife, and she had another carrot, and there she was, completely at one with the carrot. I'm like, how does she do that? I go, that's it, I'm back to stirring. And so I did. But what was amazing about that is that something happened to my own autonomic nervous system. It switched from predominantly being in that stress place of fight, flight, what we call the sympathetic tone. It switched. Now I was in that Buddha place, and I could tell, because for hours after that kindergarten when I was there, and later on for days after that being in the kindergarten that week, I was in a whole other place. My friends were telling me I was making more eye contact. They wondered what was happening, that somehow my voice had sort of just slowed down so they could understand better. I was a better listener, they were telling me. But I was changing. And that's what she realized. She realized to heal my son, to help integrate those pathways for him of balance and stillness, the tactile system, something we call proprioception, sense of where his body is in space. She needed him to be surrounded by the Buddha nervous system, not just during school, but at home as well. And then I watched my son heal. And then I noticed that I hardly ever looked at the clock. It was amazing. It was like I would sit there and I was so much more present. I was watching the children and watching exactly what they were doing, and sometimes even being able to predict a little bit about what they were just about to do. Like so present with that place. And then I look at the clock and it's like, oh my gosh, where'd all the time go? We're almost ready to go home. So it became timeless. So this is for me the first piece of what that Waldorf education does. Because what we're going to talk about tonight is we want to talk about how Waldorf education integrates that child's physical body, integrates their heart forces for compassion, and their thinking forces, and I would say their imaginative thinking forces that allows them to think outside the box, as if they have a stillness in their thinking where they're not generating all the thoughts based on maybe what they're seeing at that moment. They're still, there's no thought there, and yet then a thought comes in. Then an inspiration comes in that I call the outside of the box. And then I also want to talk with the Waldorf education too, on how it, in this process, builds that resiliency in the child and flexibility and adaptability, because it strengthens their whole sense of self. They know who they are. And who they are is not just based on test scores, whether they can figure out what the teacher wants them to learn and do well on a test that the teacher gives them. They actually get to do things. And they get to do things in such a way that their heart is behind it. So it's not this adult-directed doing. I want you to do this, then do this, then do this. They actually engage that child's heart so they want to participate. They find out what it might be that will bring that joy to that child. And when they do that, when that child is moving their physical body and their heart is engaged, then the thoughts will come in a way. They can bring them up themselves, but they can also have that stillness for those other ideas to come. And then the third part of why Waldorf is also what this drawing is all about. And this has to do with how Waldorf can help protect that child from, especially in the junior high and high school years and adult years, from feeling depressed or from feeling so empty inside or wondering if they're worthless, if there's nothing that they're good at, so that they end up not wanting to be here anymore or being very depressed and feeling like they've given up on life. And so looking at this drawing, this is a drawing that was drawn on the board in 2014 by Michaela Glockler. And she is this amazing human being, and she happens to be a pediatrician who's now retired, but really not retired because she's doing a whole lot of other things protecting children. But she was in Switzerland. And when I made this decision that after seeing what the Waldorf teachers knew, and I did not know, I had to do the Waldorf teacher training program. It was a crisis. I didn't even feel I could practice behavior developmental pediatrics. And even though the fellowship I did not use medication, did not use Ritalin, did not believe in that, actually would look at children, find their learning strengths, whether they were visual, auditory, or hands-on, and then we learned to work around their weaknesses with their strengths. But we never transformed the children, and the children were always labeled as having problems, but we did not use drugs. But all of a sudden, I finished the I do the teacher training program. I was only going to do the first year, mostly to help my son and to understand what those teachers knew. And then I realized I needed to do the teacher training program, and they were doing far more in children in prevention than I could ever do as this mainstream pediatrician. But then that third year of the teacher training, when I'm starting my interview to be a grades teacher, and I'm going to leave pediatrics completely, this epiphany comes out of the blue. I can't really explain it except I walked outside, I was very present, And I felt like a gold key appeared in my hand. And the gold key told me that I could be and do whatever I wanted to be. And in that instant, I knew I was going to go to Switzerland. And I was going to learn what this anthroposophical medicine was all about. And I was going to work with the teachers. And that's what I was going to do, and work with the children, but I was going to work with the Waldorf schools too. And I would still be this behavior developmental pediatrician, but I'd be a very different one. And it would be on my own terms. And so it was when I then went to Switzerland for those 6 weeks to begin the training is when I met Michaela Glockler. She was unbelievable. And what was amazing about her is you could ask her a question that she did not really know as much about because nobody had asked her that question before. And she'd tell you that she wanted to think about it overnight, and then she'd get back to you in the morning. And what's interesting is she'd come back in the morning, and and I knew some of the questions that people would bring up, and I just was curious what she was going to say. I had read about different articles. I knew about, this one happened to be about early primitive reflexes. What do you do when a child has them? And so I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what's she going to do? She's going to talk about the movement therapies and things. No. She actually came up with something that was completely outside the box and yet made so much sense. She said, I wouldn't try to undo the reflex. That reflex is just that child's telling you that its body is not integrated enough to let it go, to integrate it. And so what you want to do are movements, human being movements, not silly movements like I'd learned, like if your neck gets stuck moving one direction and your hand goes with it, then you go down on the floor with the other hand and try to turn your head the opposite way and go in a circle. So that's not a human movement, really. That's just a clever movement. She'd come up with these beautiful movements where it made more sense. And that's what I realized. There is another way that all of us can learn. And it's beyond what we happen to read or what we might hear from somebody else, though that actually helps. But sometimes when you have that stillness, it comes in. And of course, I saw that also with teacher Najiri, the kindergarten teacher, because we'd be in the classroom and she had dismantled an oak tree, and 1/4 of her classroom was the bolted limbs of an oak tree. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and it went high, and the ceilings were high. And I'm thinking, danger, danger, fall, danger. But she was so amazing because when the child who was the least in his body and coordinated, when he got up on the tree, I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, we gotta go over there. And I didn't say that, but she looked at me and she said, don't worry, he's gonna be fine and he's not gonna fall. And I watched, and that was exactly true. He climbed up, went down. I'm like, that's interesting. And then the most coordinated child in the class, who seemed so coordinated in his body, climbed up on that tree later that same day. And she said, we need to move over to the tree and we can have a little conversation. So we both walked over the tree, and I thought, well, why is she doing that? And she's just gently talking about something, and she puts her hand up like this, and all of a sudden the child slipped. Her hand was right there. And then he went and got back up on the tree, and she said, it's okay now. And I'm thinking, what is this? What is this place? And this was the place that Michaela Glockler had, but in a different way too. So that was the training. So when she came in 2014 to Sacramento Waldorf School,
I remember that.
I did all that I could to, come and be at her talk. And I sat way in the back. They have a huge auditorium, and I was in the bleachers, because I had come in a little bit, late, but not for hers yet. But I was late for the other one a little bit, and I didn't want to disturb people. And then what she did was she drew this star on the board. And 2 weeks prior to this, before this talk, I was sitting here thinking, I don't fully understand Waldorf education. I don't fully quite understand why it exactly works. I know that for the physical body, which I think about from 0 to 7 years, Boy, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry, you snap fingers. But anyway, so this physical body I understood. And I understood that in order for those pathways to integrate, you had to be in that relaxed autonomic nervous system so that you weren't fight-flight. Because this system depends on that child being in that present moment place, that relaxed cool place. The other thing that this depended on is my son had a difficult birth. He had a C-section birth, and I think the incision wasn't large enough to pull him out. So they had to pull really hard. I think they pulled hard on his neck and head and spine because he came out with one ear almost touching one shoulder, called torticollis. And that seemed to disrupt everything. We were told by the regular pediatricians it would just go away, but it never went away. It kept him from, he wouldn't want to be on his tummy, because as you can imagine, it was like a face plant. He couldn't turn his head, it hurt. He was just frozen like this and he couldn't breathe. Some parents will tell you that the child will, you put them on their tummy and they'll lift their head up until all the muscles give up and then they'll slam their head back down when they have this because they can't turn their head. He also couldn't creep flat on his belly like an alligator. That movement like this. And so what he did is he figured out once he could roll, he should roll from one end of the room to the other. And I thought, this is so cute. But he's not doing the normal things I learned, And then I was taught, too, in my mainstream pediatrics that children are all different. They do things different ways. And I thought, well, this is sure different. It took longer for him to crawl. Because when you think of it, when you crawl, you don't want your head down. You want it up to look at what you're looking at. And that hurt. So he tried to pull the stand as fast as he could and kind of walk early. And that crawl was late. So it was other parents that told me, I bet he got too much force on his cranium. And I bet he got some sort of cranial compression or restriction because it actually blocks these pathways. It blocks tactile, proprioception. It's what causes children to be labeled with sensory integration issues, even autistic spectrum disorders. It puts the nervous system in fight-flight. I'd never heard this stuff. I had heard that movement was sort of a silly thing to do with children, that it didn't really work. You could do OT-PT, but it was just to get the child from the door to the classroom. Anything dealing with cranial sacral work, well, that was just bogus stuff. But these parents had gone to this very specific osteopath who was trained by an osteopath named James Jealous. And he's as old as Dr. Upledger was. But he teaches a whole different way. He says you don't even go in there with even gentle finger movements. You go in there with your own nervous system that you have worked on to be in that Buddha place. Meaning you go to bed early, you have rhythm and routines, you live in nature, you try to not watch a lot of screens. That child will resonate with you because they're stuck in fight-flight. But you will show them where that place is and they'll resonate with you. And when they do resonate and go in more that Buddha place, that parasympathetic tone, they start popping out their compressions. They self-heal. And it was only because of these two parents that I went and tried this, because I had been so programmed not to believe any of this. And it was like a miracle. My son, who was 5, who never would be still, who only could hold a crayon and a pencil with a fist grip, and if you asked him to draw a picture, he just drew spirals or elaborate maps. He could draw a car, though, which was interesting, but no people. And then he'd just tear up the picture and say, I don't want to draw, don't like to draw. After that first treatment, it was about 3 to 4 days later, he asked for a paper and pen and drew his first beginning stick figure with a head and a trunk, though it wasn't quite formed yet, but 2 stick arms coming off. And 2 legs that were sort of, it was almost like 2 sticks just coming down. But it was the beginning of that trunk. And it was amazing because these drawings are proprioceptive drawings. They tell you what the brain is feeling of the muscles and joints in your body. And my son only barely drew a circle for a head. He didn't feel his body unless he moved it. And all of a sudden things started changing, sitting still at the dinner table, being able to stand still longer, being able to feel his fingers. They started to appear on his drawings. He started to be able to use them. His pencil grip changed all by itself. So that's why I have an article back there all about cranial compression, so you know about it. And also know you have the top osteopath in the country for treating children, and that's Dr. Kay Weinchink in Nevada City. So just know she's there, because people fly from all over the United States to see her, because the other people are in Europe and Canada. There's a few other people besides her that I use, but she's had 30+ years of training with James Jealous. Some of the others before James Jealous passed away had like 5 or 10 years. And they can still get to that place, but she can get there really fast, and children change more quickly, so their parents aren't going forever trying to get that compression open. But I knew this. So when Michaela Loeffler, before she came, I knew about the physical body. I knew from my teacher training program where I wanted to get to in my consciousness. I knew that I wanted my thinking not just to be stimulated by what I saw with my eyes or heard, by sense impressions. I needed my thinking not to just always be spiraling around, sometimes with my emotions, about things that I did in the past that I had regrets about, or worrying about the future, something that might happen. I was constantly in that place, more in my body since that kindergarten class, but still have that tendency for my mind and heart to take off and not be with my physical body. They were off in their own worlds. But I knew this was the place. You're open, you're receptive, you're non-judgmental. There's no thought. It's not that it's empty thought. It's just that it's still. There's stillness in that way. I knew that was a key place for being able to get ideas outside of the box, you might say. I knew in my feeling life, I still grew up in a family where you couldn't express certain feelings, and the one you really couldn't talk about was anger. Anger was not allowed. You couldn't even say you were angry, because I think that for my mom and my dad, it made them feel helpless, like they didn't know what to do, so therefore you shouldn't be angry. And it's interesting more in my adult life how I had to kind of get in touch with my feelings. I did a whole workshop for 9 days with Marshall Rosenberg, because the only word I had for angry was, I'm angry or I'm mad. And his question would be, well, how mad? Are you irritated? Or are you just a little angry? And I thought, I had no vocabulary for this. And then the other thing I found that happens, because I couldn't feel that feeling and I thought it was a bad feeling, I did not know why. I didn't know what my needs were that were not being met by I was angry. And so this whole compassionate communication that Marshall Rosenberg taught, it was to identify your feeling and the level of feeling, and all feelings are good. Whether you're angry, whether you're sad, whether you're full of fear, whether you're happy, and they're all telling you something. And what I learned later on is angry. When you feel angry, it's usually because your boundaries are being stepped on, or somebody's doing something that really is affecting your moral beliefs. So anger comes up. When you're sad, it's usually because you feel like you're losing something. You're losing a connection with someone. Fear is important. It really tells you to be more present. There's something not right now. Get present. So when you feel fear, get present in that way. And then joy, that's a wonderful thing to know too, because it's like somehow the values that I hold are being affirmed right now in whatever this is that I'm doing, that I feel so much joy for. But that was the key, but I was still working on my feelings and my needs. And I could get so frustrated that I could just completely kind of be reactive, and I didn't want to be reactive, so I'd shut down and sort of disappear for a while as a coping strategy. But I knew the place I wanted to be was to feel my feelings, know what my feelings were telling me, be able to be present when other people are having their feelings, and even know that I can check into what their needs are, because they're not checking in maybe to their needs. That's why it just feels like everything blew up. And they need to be able to make requests about what it is about their needs not being met. And if I can't meet them, maybe we can figure out who could if I didn't have the time. And I realized this place is an unconditional love place. It means that people don't have to act a certain way, They don't have to suppress certain feelings in your presence, that you can just unconditionally love them and know that just like you, they're striving in that way. And of course, some people we may love from afar rather than love close if we keep getting triggered at certain times. But that was the place. So I knew this place, and then she talked about sacred will, and I had an idea what this was. She said, you know, the most important thing we can do is do things for others, not just for ourselves. That we can do things where we don't even get credit, where we can do things for the good of all, because if we do it for the good of all, we are doing it for ourselves, but we're making ourselves part of that. So these are the two places now I understood. But I had no idea how to get there, because this is what happens in the grades at Waldorf Education, 7 to 14-year-old. And this is what happens in the high school, 14 to 21 plus, meaning adult years. And I didn't understand this, and I actually had prayed 2 weeks before that conference, just prayed. I needed a guiding star. I needed somebody to explain this to me, because I did not know how to get this place with all the healing my son had, but how do you heal these places? How do you get up here? This, what in my teacher training was soul consciousness, and that's why when I sat in the back of the room of that auditorium at Oak Waldorf School in the back bleacher, and Michaela Glockner walks to the board and she draws a star, this star. And I had goosebumps up and down my whole being, like, oh my gosh, what is she about to do? And so that's what I want to talk to you about, because this is the healing of Waldorf education. This, and what its key is that it strives to always connect the child's doing in their physical body with their heart. So if a child even doesn't want to do something, they're doing the animal block in 4th grade and they don't want to study an animal, but suddenly you're able to talk with that child and find out what animals they might love. And the child suddenly gets all excited, maybe about the cougar. And then you go, well, that's your animal to study. And the child's like, oh, I do want to do this. So now you've connected the doing with the feeling. And then at this age, you have to connect with their feeling. You have to connect at that place, because if you engage that with the doing, then the thinking arises. With this child, 0 to 7, they are just doers. They are just doers. And we can sometimes overload them with their emotions. They're not ready for this yet. They want to do. But what they do by doing is they find out what they love to do. They bounce one ball, and they go, well, that's interesting. This big ball bounces like this. And then they see another ball that's maybe a little smaller or a little bigger, and they think, oh, I wonder what that ball might do. And out of pure joy, out of child-directed joy, they move from one activity to another that they choose, and now they bounce this ball. And then they start to go, wow, this one bounces higher than that one did. Wonder why that is. Maybe I'll go look at another ball and see if I can bounce that. Maybe I'll go when I'm home. I want to bounce my balls. So their thinking arises, but it comes from their doing. And then here, with the heart forces, if you just give them information and they don't get to do anything, it's not strong enough to actually get them with their thinking. And again, the heart forces are, you're doing what this child likes, not just what the teacher's telling them to do to get a good grade or to please the teacher or to please the parent. It's not done for that. Homework is done out of pure joy. My son would come home in grade school. He'd absolutely love his homework. They didn't start until like 4th grade, which is a good thing, because it takes a while to coordinate, to get letters, writing numbers, and all those things. But he was so excited, because his homework always had doing. It wasn't a bunch of papers. It was doing things. You know, he had manipulative math, and then he had mental math, but it always turned into something kind of practical. Then he wanted to do counting at home, and how many logs should we each bring in? If you want to bring in 40 logs, what does that mean? And there's 2 of us. You know, and if we each take 2 logs, what does that mean? Or 4 logs. It was amazing, his mind was on fire. But it came from him in that way. And that's what Michaela Glackler talked about. And then she said, when you get to the high school, you've got to engage their thinking. They've got to feel inspired. And then they've got to get behind it with their heart. Don't just give them a test. Make them regurgitate information. Because then what happens is their whole self-esteem depends on how they do on the test. Do they get an A? Do they get a B? Do they get a C? That's why Waldorf doesn't even do grades. It might add them in 7th and 8th grade if the child's going to go into a regular high school. But usually it's a narrative. What are their strengths? What are their challenges? Where have things improved? But here, if you tell this child, you give them subjects and all that they do is to take tests, then it becomes, how do I psych out this teacher to get a good grade on the test? What is it, knowing this teacher, where do they test from, the book or from the lecture? And then you can manipulate, and you can actually figure out how to get your A's, because I sure did. But yet, unlike my brother, who just absolutely loved to learn, and would read the book and not do any of that, he was lucky to get C's and D's. And yet, I'll tell you, to this day, my brother knows more about history and about almost every subject that we studied, because he learned it out of love. And he just gave up trying to get good grades. I was still kind of maybe trying to, maybe conditionally. I noticed my parents' eyes would light up when I got good grades. And otherwise they seemed too stressed out and distracted. So it was a kind of conditional love at home. Like if I did these things, I could feel that extra energy. So I did whatever I could to get good grades. But the problem was, there's an emptiness too. Because why don't I really know something? Or why does my brother really know something and I don't? I memorized all the dates, I regurgitated on the test. For World War II, I knew everything. I don't now, it's gone, because it's only a short-term memory. But he actually really learned it out of pure love and interest. And he also didn't get much doing. He wasn't at a Waldorf school either. But that is what leads, Michaela Glackler said, to the emptiness. Is you suddenly start to think, what's wrong with me? And the other thing you might think is if you can't get the A's, and you then start to think you're not smart, that there's something wrong with you. And so then we're going to talk about what are the things that disrupt our ability to develop our physical body, to develop our feeling life, where first we find what we like, what we don't like, and we figure out what is it attached to, like what needs need to be met and what requests can I make, because we're all trying to transform to the higher level of feeling. And we want our physical body to be built so I don't have to think about it when I move, because then it makes it so exhausting to do things. And then my physical body can't become the instrument of the will. I want these things always interconnected throughout my whole education and throughout my whole life. It's protected for us adults too. So what are these hindrances that Michaela Glackler said? She said, well, the number one thing that interferes with the neurological development of your physical body, touch, balance, proprioception, bilateral integration, putting your nervous system in fight-flight, she said, is inappropriate and overstimulating sense impressions. And mostly media, because what I had learned from teacher Najiri with my son, she said that 1 hour of media would put his whole nervous system in overdrive for 4 hours. And so when he was in the kindergarten, he was working with her for 2 hours after school, 2 to 3 times a week. She requested that he didn't have media, because she said otherwise all the movements I do with him won't imprint. Or if he had it in the morning before coming to school, he won't even be able to learn from all the movement we do. So this was this key part, because it needs to relax our autonomic nervous system, just like that cranial work tries to do. But this is the way you do it with Waldorf education, and then the child can start opening, sometimes even cranial compressions. They don't always have to go to K-Wine-Cheng. They heal in the preschool and the kindergarten if they love their teacher and their teacher loves them. and they're able to do child-directed things, and they're not being asked to sit at a desk and write numbers and letters. We can't even imprint the accurate shape and orientation of numbers and letters until we're like 6.5 to 7.5 for a girl and 8 to 9 for a boy. And if you sit there and ask children to write numbers and letters, you can have them copy things in first grade, but if you ask them to write by memory numbers and letters, they have mirror images because the system's not built. And then they get all these reversals. And so we actually put them in stress. We put their autonomic nervous system in stress so then they can't even continue to integrate and develop. So that was the idea, that was this hindrance. Here she said our life forces are so key. And they go to build our body, especially the first 7 years. And then around age 7, some of those life forces stay to provide, our heart, our brain, our kidneys, all our organs. But at age 7, some of them are now freed up because all these other pathways have been built, touch and balance and proprioception and bilateral integration. And that child's in the relaxed autonomic nervous system. And what those life forces are is they go all the way up here. They're transformed into imaginative pictures in our thinking. So one of the things that's hard to explain to some of my colleagues is something happened to me during the teacher training program. And that is, I stopped media those 3 years, and we did art, we did music, we did clay, we did everything I've never really done. I always thought I wasn't an artist. I only did paint by number because I was so afraid of making mistakes. And I remember being yelled at in 5th grade because my Christmas tree had the top cut off. Somehow I hadn't followed the directions correctly. So I decided I wasn't an artist at all. And this was the most painful part. And I remember crying when an art teacher I think he was from the Netherlands, he came and he said, I want you just to draw by memory 16 trees that you've seen in your life. I thought, my God, I hadn't even looked at a tree enough to even know how to draw a pine tree. I can do a pine tree. But frankly, I don't even remember if the branches, when do they always stay up? Or do they go out in one place and then more tilting down? I learned that later on, they do that. But I cried. I drew 2 trees, a pine tree and an oak tree, and they didn't even look like those things. And he was so kind because he said, well, you could just take it home with you and just go out and sit by the different trees and just look at them, and then you can draw. But these things were amazing because they transformed my imagination. The first year, the 3 years, we had clay, and we were asked we could make anything we wanted, and all I knew is to take a piece of clay, roll it into a hot dog, and I made a person. I just made a trunk, and then I had 2 hot dog arms, 2 hot dog feet, and a head. And that's all I knew to do. By the 3rd year, they put a big slab of clay, and they said, just look at it, and just see if anything pops out of the clay. And to my shock and amazement, 2 boys having fun wrestling were inside the clay. And all I had to do was start removing the clay. And my classmates were like completely shocked too, because this never happened to me in that way. Clay class was excruciating, but I saw these 2 boys, and as I started pulling it away, the teacher saw it. He says, oh, you're drawing. You see 2 boys in there wrestling. I see it too. And it was unbelievable, you guys. And we are all capable of this. So this imaginative thinking, suddenly I could read fairy tales, and the stories were living in my mind. And then I could retell them from my mind, by memory. Suddenly I realized my classmates would be telling me a story or saying words, and I had pictures. And I still do from that teacher training program. It is the way, it's a whole different way than having intense notes and talking from your notes. It's pictures, and they will appear, and they will come in a certain order if you're trying to talk about something, and then you put it into words. A complete difference from that teacher training time that we're all capable of, but we don't know it. So what is it then? So the life forces, they are freed up for this. And life forces are nourished by all the things you can think about. We could talk about the 7 essential nutrients for a healthy child. These were the 7 things the kindergarten teacher did, and the preschool teacher did, and I didn't know why. I didn't know that it was strengthening this whole autonomic nervous system to put it in the present moment. That Waldorf education, by connecting the physical body and the heart and the mind, that's the definition of the present moment. So getting enough sleep, eating nutritious foods, doing movements that you do out of joy, not competitive sports where you're trying to please that coach when you're real young, maybe after, around age 11 or 12. That idea when you're all integrated, but all these things, rhythms and routines, everything that puts your autonomic nervous system in a relaxed place, staying warm. What you expose your senses to is part of nutrition, not just food, but what you see, what you smell, what you hear. Does it represent goodness, truth, and beauty? Because if it does, that strengthens your life forces. If it's just clever, or it's just loud, those are things that disrupt and put you more in fight-flight and pull you out of the present moment. So what would disrupt your life forces and disrupt your imaginative thinking you develop and make you weaker in your immune system, and you can get sick more often, would be unhealthy habits and lifestyle of not getting enough sleep, not eating the healthy foods, having a more chaotic, rhythms when you're always in stress. So she talked about that. And then here was heart forces. This is so key. Remember that child from 7 to 14 has to first feel their own feelings, and that's what's really hard for us as parents. It's like, but they have to feel their feelings. And then, but your job then is to move it over to what is that feeling coming from? So they can go, am I hungry? Or am I upset about what somebody said to me at school today? But then they can make that jump. And then the next thing is, what can you do about it? What making that request, which somebody may or may not follow, but it makes them feel empowered. The reason you do this, and you survive these difficult years that even come over here into the high school time, is because once that child feels their feelings, knows they have needs, knows they can make requests, it's the beginning of transforming to realize that other people have feelings, and they might be different than mine. Other people have needs that are just as important as my needs, and they may make requests that I may or may not agree with, but that comes from them. So it gives you that ability to love unconditionally. Because here, as friends, you may only love someone that thinks like you or feels like you, but otherwise if they're different. And here at this age, you can be wearing glasses or wearing funny different socks or different shoes. That's where all these groups kind of fall. And we get bullying because it's like, no, you're not, you don't like what I like. You're different. So this is the place we have to navigate, because it will be transformed into this. And then here's the real key, our thinking forces. So initially at ages, Michaela Glockler said, from ages 4 to 16, 9th to 10th grade, our feelings still rule. But we are very good with our thinking. This is the first time your child may not tell you the truth. This is when they say, oh yeah, I turn my cell phone off if they have one, and, at 9 o'clock, whatever the rule is. And instead they wake up at 2 in the morning and start texting other people that are up at 2 in the morning. And then you wonder why they're so tired in the morning. I'm saying this out of personal experience. So this piece, they're here, they use their feelings, they feel strong feelings, and they know other people have feelings, but they use it to manipulate a little bit. It's like, well, if I don't want to do it, I'm going to use my thinking to figure out a way. I do not have to do this. And my parents say I can't do it. Well, I'm figuring out a way that I can. So that's what happens. It's still tied together, and they're very tied with their peers. There can still be teasing and bullying. You don't think the same way I do, and things like that. That compassion yet hasn't come in. But something happens around age 16 to 17 if we allow it. If we have an environment where we don't allow bullying, where we have teachers that are constantly trying to connect all these things, trying to get that child to see that higher place, of feeling in a certain way, and we connect them, and they're thinking, and so they feel good, and then in their heart, and then they're doing. But around age 16, they suddenly realize, I have my whole life, Mikhail Glockner would say this, I have not ever talked to this boy since kindergarten, because my friends said he was weird, and they didn't like him. I have never talked to him, and I have no idea myself whether I would like to be a friend with him or not. She said it was like an epiphany. She walked over to him, because he's still in her classes, it's 10th grade, 11th grade actually, sorry, and she says, and she goes, I'm going to ask him a question about the homework. So she said, is this what we're supposed to do, this page for our homework? And he said, oh yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. And she said, oh, thank you very much. And she goes, there's nothing wrong with him. He's fine. Why did I not even ever talk to him? Why did I not know that myself? And this is the time in high school, junior year, where teenagers want to take a subject and they want to break it all down and they want to make it their own. And one of the other lectures I heard was from a high school Waldorf teacher. And what he said is, he said, and I'm not going to do it yet, but he said, you see this piece of chalk? This is that subject that you're trying to master. And he said, in 11th grade, this is what you want to do with it. And then he puts it in his mouth, and he chews it. And he's just like foaming with, he had white chalk. But boy, did that impress on me. And he said, if you keep telling that 11th grader, all they get to do is just observe. And then in 9th grade, then they compare and they contrast in these different science experiments. You better let them start to express their opinion by junior year, because they're ready and they need to, and they will be really upset if you don't. And then this same Waldorf teacher gave this beautiful story about, he said, if they're able to get sort of a Waldorf education where they keep coming back to some of the same topics, but they keep learning more and more and more, whatever it is, on music or history or in English or literature. But he said, imagine that you are a turret of a castle, and you have a spiral iron staircase inside, and you start at kindergarten, and right at the base of the staircase, and there's a big window, and you look out into the world. You go up a couple more steps, you're now in first grade, another window, you look out into the world. It might even encompass some of what was there in kindergarten too. And then you keep going all the way up, each grade with big windows, getting pieces and parts, sometimes come spiraling back to the same view, but you see it in such a different way now. There's so many other things you've learned. And he said, what's supposed to happen in 12th grade is you get to the top of that tower, and there's a trap door. And you open the trap door and you step out on the top of that tower. You close the trap door, and now you see all around you, 360 degrees, and you put everything back together. And you put it back together. And that is what will empower you, so that you get to that place where I can think these thoughts. And you've learned to have your heart behind them. You're not just doing something because you have to, or you get a good grade. You're doing it because you want to learn it. And you're not just taking tests with your physical body. You're doing things, you're making things, whether it's making a book or whether it's using forging and making a sword. But at this place, now you are at this place where you're integrated. And as long as what the number one thing that will tear that integration apart, more so than all these other orange things I talked about. Here I didn't mention this, but it was living in fear and not feeling loved unconditionally will contract the heart forces. Here this contracts the physical body, so it stays in a place that doesn't get mind-free. The child is sort of stuck. They have to think to move their body. Here the life forces can be affected, both for their imaginative thinking and for their strength of their immunity. But here, this is the negative thoughts that we say to ourselves about ourselves. And some of this our culture puts on us. Our teachers sometimes unknowingly, parents sometimes unknowingly, they lose it. You are no good. You are not smart. You are stupid. You can't do math. You're not good at math. You can't do reading, you're not good at reading. All these labels we have. You're too anxious, you need medication. You know, you're too sensitive in your feelings. You're too overreactive in that way. You've got conduct disorder. All of that stuff that my profession labels, all the things that we hear growing up, even that 5th grade teacher I told you about that convinced me I couldn't be an artist, ever. Isn't that amazing? I took those words. So we have to be so careful with our words. And that's why I have something else I think was given as a handout at your parent newsletter, but it's also back here, about what are the affirming positive things to say to your child. And it's gratitude. It's thank you for taking out the trash. Or I really appreciated how you added those yellow napkins at dinner, you know, under the fork. You do something that's not like you're always so great, you're always so good, or the opposite. You're always terrible, you always make too much noise. We have to really remember we're saying words to help integrate this place, because this is the number one thing she said, that those thoughts that we have about ourselves dismantle our thinking. Take us even away from having an open, receptive, non-judgmental, or even imaginations we think we're not good enough. It disconnects us from our heart. It disconnects us from our physical body. We get apathetic, and then we want to self-medicate because it is painful to have your thoughts not connected to your heart and your body, and to have them constantly there. You're no good, you're no good, you're no good. So we turn to alcohol. We turn to anything that will numb us for a while. Or we just really, or we buy into all those things that we been said to us or we took upon ourselves, and we just give up and just barely go through life, but we're not happy and we don't feel, you know, that place. So this is so key, because when we have this, when our thinking and our heart and our physical body are integrated, that high school student, 11 and 12-year-old, it's like, I can think and I have ideas. And they start getting ideas. What can we do about global warming? You know, I mean, they're all excited about all the ideas and all the projects. And they can get others to come along with them. And for a while, they might, you know, call it their idea. I'm going to make my mark on the world. That's the most important thing. And some of us stay that way as adults. I'm going to make my mark. I'm going to, you know, do whatever I'm going to do, and I'm going to be famous and things. But this needs to transform too. And it needs to transform to the good of all. Where eventually, I'm going to do things in this world, but it's not my mark. I'm going to find other like-minded people, and we're going to do things in this world, and it doesn't matter if I ever get credit or not. We're doing it for the sake of doing it because it's good. And so this is that key place, and this is what takes us up here. And the last part that I want to end up sometimes as adults is this like, oh my gosh, this is like, how do we do all this with our children when we're so exhausted? Or at least, boy, I sure have been. I don't know what the last 3-4 years have been like for you guys as well, but it's been hard. It's been painful experiences in my heart with people passing. It's been physical injuries and certain things, going through things, and real doubting sometimes, you know, a real assessing of where am I in this? Because I didn't have that Waldorf education. I had that teacher training program. And I'm getting closer, I'm a lot closer to being up here. Non-judgmental, open and receptive, but not always. I can slip. This one is my hardest one. Equanimity. If things are difficult, I just want to disappear. I call it my peppy, long stalking escape survival method. It's called get the heck out of here as fast as you can. I have another survival method. I call it my Diana CEO method, called let's just make a list. Plan A, plan B, plan C, like a cat in the hat. So I am going to micromanage my entire life and any future thing that might happen to me. But these are things trying to keep that reactivity And I still have trouble expressing my feelings, and I still have trouble sometimes, okay, why am I sad? Why am I sad? What is this? And am I sad, or is it really anger underneath? You know, and the anger is directed at me, so that's making me sad. Boy, this is a lifelong journey, or a multitude of lifetimes. So I flip over here quite a bit. I flip sometimes, I hate to say it, like a 14-year-old. And then I pull myself together for these talks, and with the families I see, I am the best person I could possibly be. It is, something helps me out to bring me to a place, because then in my personal life, I'm still working on this. But I realize this is important, and I realize I haven't paid enough attention to this. So boy, my life forces got really depleted. It was in 2018, and I actually had an accident, and I injured my knee. And it took forever for me. I wasn't strong enough to convince Kaiser that I didn't have arthritis, that I'd actually injured my knee. So it took 4 months to get the surgery. And by then, the whole joint had fused together, and all my muscles had atrophied. I looked like a toothpick. And Kaiser, during anesthesia, had to break the knee. They tore the ligaments and things to actually restart the whole healing process. And you guys, I was in a walker with walking sticks for 1.5 years, and I just felt so vulnerable. And I felt so lousy for not sticking up for myself. I should have stuck up for myself. I should have gotten that MRI as soon as possible, not like 3 months later. And then I was right. Did they tell me I was right? No. They did say there was a piece of bone stuck in the joint, and that's why I couldn't bear weight on it without any pain, and that needed to be removed. But it also fused in the joint. So all of these things I still struggle with. But I know where this place is, and I know from the Glockler how to get there. And it's okay if I have relapses sometimes, and you will too. I sometimes will think I can get by without my life forces. But boy, I'm really careful before I give a talk. If I want to have pictures in my mind and be able to just have some of this written here, but the rest has to come from inside of me, I am getting my sleep. I am so good at getting my sleep before I have a talk. I'm really good with eating. I'm usually pretty good, but no ice cream, no breads, nothing that would give me brain fog, because it does, but it's usually not that bad. But it's like, no. But I realized, wow, if I did this more, I would be far more present in certain ways, and I am more present. My son told me, he said, you know, Mom, I used to tell him he did this. He used to take his hands and put it on my face when he was talking to me and guide it to look at him. Because I was all scattered, and it was just amazing. I mean, he just didn't quite know what he was doing, but he said, Mom, you've been changing. You know, he even used that word. He goes, you know, he's a Waldorf student. He grew up in all this stuff. He says, you know, Mom, you're just more present, I would say, since I started high school. And I said, yeah, I'm working on it. And I still am. So don't be so hard on yourselves, but spend lots of time in nature. That's what I meant to tell you. Lots of time in nature. Lots of time doing what you love in music, or it could be the arts, or it might be in something you enjoy. But whenever you do that, you're in the present moment. Your thinking is connected with your heart and with your doing. So you don't play the piano if you don't like playing the piano, and if you criticize yourself when you play the piano, nope, that just tears you apart. You do things you absolutely love that are integrating for you. And then if you want to know how you're doing as far as how present you are during the day, meaning how much of your mind and your heart and your body are all interconnected in the same place at the same time, you do what Dennis Klochek taught us to do during this workshop. He's this wonderful teacher for me too, and he was at Rio Center College when that existed. And I did this workshop called Soul Consciousness with him. And he did the same exercise that we had to do during the teacher training program that I did not like. We had to go to bed at night and sit up in bed, and we were supposed to review our day backwards in pictures, not talking out loud, but you start from where you were. You know, I got my pajamas on, And then I was, then I had, walked downstairs instead of upstairs, because I was sitting in a chair and I was looking at a book, and you literally go backwards. Well, the first several months of the teacher training program, I had no clue what I did during the day, and especially what order it was. And she had us take notes like a diary. It was miserable. And what we didn't learn that was flow check, because he would do it again, and then I was better at it because I was more present. I learned to slow my day down so I could remember it. That's one way to do it. And I learned not to multitask it as much, because then I could know the order of when I did things. But he said, just start with meals. If you love meals, then just remember what you had for dinner, but going backwards, then lunch, and then breakfast. And then he said you can start to slowly fill in the gaps. But he said it will make you not only present, you'll know when you were present and when you were checked out during the day. It will make you accountable. You'll remember when you walked up to a person and you noticed they had tears in their eyes. You'll suddenly remember this, but then they said something that was kind of hurtful to you. And then you just responded to what they said, like, that's not true. But suddenly in the review of that day, I thought, my gosh, what was going on? I didn't even ask them, are you okay? Because this happened later in the conversation. It was in the very beginning that they had the tears. It was something they were coming from or they were thinking about. So then you go back and you say, hey, I just realized, I was dumping all these different things on you, and I just didn't check in with you because you seemed upset when we first were meeting. And then you find out a whole different story about what was going on. So it actually strengthens your heart forces too. And it makes you accountable. Oh yeah, I didn't go swimming today, I didn't go for that walk, my body did really need that. So that's one of the great things you can do, is review of the day, and you just do it just 5 or 10 minutes. If you do it laying down, you'll fall asleep. Because it turns out, this is what we learned in the teacher training program as teachers, that if you don't have much time for sleep, you're going to find back there a sleep handout, that we need at least 7 hours as an adult, 7.2 hours. And some of us more, some of us less. It depends if it's summer, it depends if it's winter. But one of the ways you can get into deep sleep faster is when you go to bed at night, without realizing it, you review your whole day unconsciously. So if you do it consciously, you get to skip that place. And then you actually get into deep sleep faster is the idea. You'll feel more refreshed, even if you felt like you didn't have as much time. And we can do it with our children. At night, we can ask them, so what was the most fun part of the whole day? Or start at night. What story? What was the story you really liked that we read? Because I read you 2 books. Was there one you really liked more than the other? And then, oh, how about dinner? We went to Grandma's for dinner. So you actually can do it together, because you're going to remember too. You're going to be picturing while they're picturing what you did, and you help them. You'll find it helps their sleep. So these are things, but be kind to yourself. It's the striving that counts. That's the other thing. It's the striving that counts. When you find yourself being completely out of balance, you could tell, because the reactivity comes in. I just know it. And usually it's when I haven't gotten enough sleep. And then I'm just not as present. And so then be kind to yourself and say, okay, tomorrow is a new day, and here we go again. But maybe it'll be different this time. We will have to see. But this is what I wanted to share about my experiences and what I've learned about why Waldorf. So, thank you. Thank you. So I took a lot of different journeys, and that's why I brought a lot of articles in the back, and some of them I've updated, and the older ones are on my website. But I have a website with more than 50 articles. They're all free that you can, read or copy and download. But I'm going through my website now, and it's interesting, reading some of the articles I had written maybe 20 years ago. And they came in different ways. Some of them came like a musician talks to you. Like all of a sudden you go on a hike and you get back to your car and it's like a download is coming. For them it might be a song or a tune, but for me it's like the most important things I'm learning, and usually it's about my life. You'll see, it's a lot about what I'm learning, but it comes and I have to write it on a napkin, and then I go home and it just pours out, either by hand and then sometimes on the computer. So some of the articles I look at and I don't even remember I wrote them exactly. Like, how did I write that? How was I so wise? Why didn't I read this article 5 years ago? It was amazing. It was like, you know, and I wrote the article 10, 12 years ago, but it felt like from a different place. But I've been having fun because I'll read it and I'll get into this certain place and then the other ideas start to come in. It's like, oh my gosh, there's a sentence. That should be added, that clarifies things. So I'm updating it, and mostly because I'm trying to pass on what I know as far as seeing children, assessing children. So I'm giving this huge workshop in Los Angeles, and it's for all the teachers and parents that want to attend it. It's going to be July 10th through the 14th, and it's called the Kindergarten, First Grade, Second Grade Assessment, so you can assess your own child. But I want to teach teachers how to assess the children in their classroom for all these movements, but also to make sure that this is at first grade, but starting in second grade, that they haven't mastered reading by sight, because that will lead to a whole lot of learning problems. Sight reading is fine. It's something you can learn in college, maybe the end of high school, graduate school, law school, is to find the word and number fast. It's scanning and skimming, but it happens in the same part of your brain where you make a movie, normally, like when someone reads to you. And if you read phonetically on this other side, I mean, there's things light up all over the place, but the area that lights up when you string sounds together and break words apart, what we call phonemic awareness, is here. And as long as you're interconnected here, you use this place to make a movie. So if you read phonetically and all your pathways are built, you can do cross-lateral skipping and double jump roping, you will create a movie while you read, not just when you listen to someone else. But all these sight words that they've been teaching in the public school, teaching children to learn 500 words, 1,000 words, they're words like it and in, when you can sound out, but they're words like boys and girls and canoe and colors, red and blue, things you can sound out by spelling rules. Sight words are supposed to be words that are funny words that don't come from other countries and languages, so they don't follow our spelling rules, or words like the, which are actually two words put together that don't make sense. But you don't have to teach that. We're teaching that in preschool, because the right brain can start to learn it around 2.5 to 3 years of age, but that right brain has a much more important function, not to visually, spatially recognize a word by seeing how long it is and, you know, what the first and last letter is. Because I will show, you know, a word like this. I have certain words like this to a sight reader who might be in 5th or 7th grade. This is the only way they read. And they tell you they don't like reading. They only will read graphic novels where there's a picture for every 2 sentences. And a lot of us adults might have been taught by sight reading too, because we pushed it so early. Phonetics doesn't come in boys till 3rd or 4th grade, where you can string a sound together. Full, you know, like land. You can identify L as, you know, L is a O, and A, we taught as ad, and N is N, but to string it, land, that takes this left parietal place. But I'll show a sight reader a word like this that they may not have seen, and they'll tell me it is congratulations. And that's the thing. But a phonetic-based reader is using every sound figured out, and even if they haven't seen it, it's congregations. You know, they may get the vowel sound wrong, but that's the difference. Those fluent phonetic readers, if you read fast enough, you sometimes can't tell who's reading by fluent sight or who's reading by fluent phonetic. But the sight readers are blocking or inner picturing. They'll remember something for 24 hours, but then a week later they won't even remember the book. If you ask them to tell you about what the book was about, they will have to reread the book to try to write a report. They'll have to plagiarize and copy sentences. The phonetic reader, assuming they have this pathway, will have made a movie for the rest of their life. And if they were awake when they read it and had some joy, their heart was behind it, they can tell you about that book years later. And they might forget little teeny tiny details, the name of the dog in the story or the name of one character, but the whole story they'll tell in sequence. The sight readers, like I read the book, I have no clue what it's about. So this is really important because sight readers also have problems punctuating, doing grammar, writing, learning capitalization rules, and they get labeled with executive function disorder and nonverbal learning disabilities. And sometimes if that proprioceptive system isn't functioning still, it's blocked. If they have a cranial compression, they're reversing numbers and letters because it's blocked, so they still have reversals. So in the back, I gave a sheet, and it's on my website, and there's a lot more articles you can read about this. Teaching children to write, read, and spell, part 1, part 2, sight versus phonetic reading, how to assess it in your own child. But back there is my one-page PDF that you can go through. If a parent, if you're curious about yourself, you can go through and you just circle what sentence is more true. And if they both seem true, you can put a little circle in the middle between them. At the end, you look where all your circles are. Are they under fluent sight or are they under fluent phonetic? We want children to fluently phonetically read. We hardly don't even really need to teach sight reading at all. They'll pick up the as T-H-E and is. You can have games. Is not is, you know, and was is was. But you can make games out of that. But they'll pick that up themselves as they're writing and copying sentences. We want them stringing sounds so that they make them believe. Because that's what I see, a whole lot of children that come to me with fluent sight reading, and sometimes this area is blocked, and it's been blocked since birth. And I can tell because it's the opposite side of your body neurologically that actually sends, you know, the information is sent up here. So proprioception, I can see this pattern where something's here. And it's affecting them. They're tighter on these muscles too. They pull up, sometimes their shoulder blade's higher on this side. So then you have to release that because they could do all the tutoring you want, 3 to 5 years of phonetic-based tutoring with Susan Barton, but if the pathways aren't open, it won't imprint. But if those pathways are open and if they just learned to read by sight in preschool and kindergarten and first grade, and even though the pathway's open, they now know all these words, tens of thousands of words by sight. Just by, so sight means you look at the shape. You only notice the first and last letter, so here the shape would be like this. I did it accurately. And you notice this and this. That's sight reading. And that is to find a word or number when you've lost your place or a sentence. That's all it's good for. You're in law school, you're about to go into court, somebody was reading a book and they said, I don't know what page it's on. But in the middle here, in the middle of the book somewhere, is a case about Robinson and Brown. And if you can find it, and then I read it phonetically, so you made a movie of it, you will know something before you walk into the courtroom. That's what sight reading's for. It was never meant, it is not real reading. And the silver lining of this pandemic is that if you were a sight reader and you memorized lots of words, and then people didn't reinforce your memory, you lost your ability to read. So you come back to school and all of a sudden children have dropped their reading levels. But not the phonetic ones, but there's not very many that are phonetic because our whole curriculum here is pushing sight reading in preschool. Finland does reading at first grade is just sounds and letters, and phonetic reading, their whole curriculum is phonetic based. 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade. They are top 10 in the world in high school for their reading comprehension, math, think math word problems, and for writing. And here we are, you know, thinking it's the same, oh, you can either sight read or you can phonetically read, it doesn't matter, just get them fluent. But then if they start having problems with their spelling and their writing and not remembering, well, that's a learning disability. You know, and if they're reversing, well, that's dyslexia. They just don't realize, no, that's a proprioceptive system that's not fully developed. It might be blocked. Or that's ADD. No, that's a proprioceptive system blocked and the whole nervous system is in fight. And if you address what's underneath it, you don't end up with these labels that pharmaceutically all lead to drugs. That's what the whole manual is. The DSM-5 manual is to lead to drugs. And my whole profession has bought into it, of behavior developmental pediatrics. not anthroposophical medicine, but that one gets me in trouble. You have to be quiet, because it sounds too weird, but all it really is just looking at that child more deeply. That's it. They have high blood pressure. You would want to know what's your relationships like? What's your job like? Are you doing what you love? In other words, is your thinking and heart and body all connected? Because if it's not, if you do not like your job, you need to either transform it or leave. If your relationship, you're not working on it, you've got to work on it. Because the disconnect will lead to disease, illness, depression, addiction, in all that way, and not wanting to be here anymore. So these are the key things, but they're back there as handouts. So there's handouts on that table and on that table, just so that you have enough information. And then know you can always call me. I'm so excited now because I'm really back in practice. I've been managing both my parents and a lot of their disease and illness and things, and I finally feel freed up. But I do free consults every Friday. You can call and say you want to speak with me a half hour or an hour. These days I've been doing an hour. And then we can just set up, and I'll usually have you read some articles. Jeanette was my office manager these last 22 years, and she'll give you, I kind of say based on what your concerns might be, how about looking at this article? Some of those are back there. And then we just can talk. And I have a huge recommendations. My general clinic recommendations is on my website. So I was not having to see families sometimes over the pandemic. We could figure out between the parents' eyes and what they're telling you, what might be going on, and then we can try things. And then the child always tells us that we're on the right track because the healing comes. So just so you know that too. Okay, now I'm quiet. And I don't know what time, is it 8:30? Oh, 8 o'clock, so we still have time for questions. That's amazing. Okay, so those of you that might have sitters or you need to leave or you live further away, that's okay. You can do that. But if there's any questions or things you wanted, that I could maybe explain better or something different? Yes.
I just had more of a share maybe than a question.
Yes.
Because you were talking about sight reading versus phonetic. I've never thought about that for myself. Which one I might be. I'm like, oh, I'm a sight reader, like through and through. I read something very quickly,
yeah.
And I don't remember it, I don't retain it very well.
Right.
And I remember myself as a first grader, like I could read really fast. And I got a lot of praise for being able to read really fast.
Right.
I have a first grader now who is clearly reading phonetically. And she's just started because she's not being...
So you could hear her sound it out.
Right. And she's not being pushed to read, right? But she on her own is starting to string together these different sounds.
Right.
And it's really amazing to see how different that experience is.
And what will really be different is that movie. So when she gets that, the pathways are interconnected, she will simultaneously make a movie. And so I also was taught sight reading. I went into the public school at 5 years of age in first grade, and I diligently learned words without realizing it. What I realized is if someone gave me something to read I'd never seen, I would read it in a monotone and not pause, so that I needed, if I was doing something, in a performance or something like that, I would have to read it several times on my own and practice. Because I couldn't simultaneously picture while I would read. Phonetic readers can, and you hear it. I give them a 4th grade paragraph. This may be a kindergartner from the public school that's not Waldorf per se, where they did a preschool and really pushed the sight reading. And they'll read the words. They'll go, 6 boys went on a vacation together. They went fishing in a blue boat. One boy caught a fish, the others did not. They all went home. And I'll go, wow. I can tell. I always say, not wow. I go, great work. But I'm inside, I'm going, oh boy. And because then I'll ask them what's it about. And then they'll think and they'll actually tell me the same sentence they've memorized if they have a good memory. 6 boys went on a vacation together. They went fishing in a blue boat. One boy caught a fish, the others did not. They all went home. And then if you get a phonetic reader, which is going to be later. That'll be like more second or third grade. They're going to be, if they read this, it'll be 6 boys went on a vacation together. They went fishing in a blue boat. One boy caught a fish. The others didn't catch a thing. And they all went home. And if all their pathways are in, you can ask them, well, tell me about it, in your mind. Did you see nothing? Or did you see letters? Or did you see a picture? Or did you see a movie? And they, I saw a movie. We were all loaded in the station wagon, and it was my dad who was driving, and we were all going to the same lake we go to every summer. It was a beautiful sunny day, and there were huge pine trees, and there were these 3 blue canoes, and we all got in them, and we were all in our bathing suits, and we all were fishing, and actually someone caught a fish, but it got away, but only one really got the fish in the boat, and then we all went home. Meaning it's his own words, or her own words. That was the phonetic reader, compared to the sight reader that's just trying to diligently please you and remember everything, but they're not having the images. They get the images when I read to them. So then I take that paragraph and I say, now you can just listen. Close your eyes or keep your eyes open and see if a movie pops up. And I read it more slowly. I read it so that I have a movie while I'm reading it to them, because then something reinforces that. And then they'll say, oh yeah, I saw them. And if they had told me by memory that it was 5 boys, they suddenly, oh no, it was 6. And I said, did you see the water? Oh yeah, it was like Lake Tahoe, because that's where we go as a family. Isn't it amazing? Our experiences. We all have different experiences, but that's what you're going to pull up. If someone talks about a lake, I go to Jackson Lake in Wyoming, because that's where my family went, to the Grand Tetons every summer to meet my grandparents. Lake Tahoe I didn't even see till I was much, in my 20s, so that I can add that to my, my picture. But it's amazing. But that's what we want. That is real reading. And it usually happens when you read to your child. Or when they listen to an audiobook, as long as they aren't reading by sight at the same time. So you want to develop their picture-making capacities. Tell them stories. Read to them till they throw you out of the room with a book. Hopefully that won't be till 5th or 6th or 7th grade. But if they're phonetically reading, they're going to start loving chapter books with almost no pictures. They'll get upset with the picture because they had a better one. Mm-hmm. And so that's how you know. But that reading is what will allow you to do math word problems, chemistry word problems, physics. So I was a pure sight reader. I could do those things, but I had to work hard. Math, I had to write little scenes, stick figures, to figure out the math word problem or practice the problems, because I was reading it by sight. Chemistry, I got molecules to try to understand, so that when I read something, I could visualize it as a second step. I go in the teacher training program, and Dora Winter was the director, said I had to do a phonetic reading course, because she said, my spelling, I had problems with spelling. I go, yeah, that's just me. And she says, well, no, that's usually because you're not reading phonetically. Who cares about spelling? If all you're looking at is the first and last letter, it looks about the last length and it has about the right space. But a phonetic reader is always paying attention to whether there's 1 S or 2 S's. So the thing about that is it happened also right later with my son getting, also he was a sight reader, because I didn't know this. So he was in 6th grade. And so we spent 1.5 years after all his pathways were open, having to finally strengthen his left side, because he was fluent sight. And he couldn't spell things and he didn't like to read, and he completely developed the other side too. And now he has both. If he wants to scan, he does the sight reading. He'll know he's sight reading because he has no inner movie. But if he's reading something that he really needs to absorb and make a movie out, he's got to make sure he's phonetically, even rapidly, sounding it out. So these are little tricks, but that's what's back there, is my little handout from my clinical experience of the difference. And I switched to, and that was part of why I started to make pictures when I was reading fairy tales. Prior to that, I had to write them all down, and I had note cards. So the first year, I had note cards to tell a fairy tale. Even if I read it 5 or 10 times, I had to have note cards, and that was okay. Dora Winter didn't say you can't have note cards. But something happened during that. it was the first time I realized there's a difference. And what I realized is, because I slowed down, is if I read one way, a picture popped up. If I read too fast, the pictures were gone. And then I realized with Rudolf Steiner, having to read his books, I needed pictures to understand them. We were given these assignments, read a paragraph and summarize it in 1 or 2 words. It's like, how do you do that? Because if you're a sight reader, you don't even get the whole context of everything. And that was the other thing. I didn't like poetry. I didn't understand it. All of that changed during the teacher training program. I'd suddenly read a poem, and I'm in a movie, and then I got the inner meaning of the movie. Before that, I was just trying to figure out, okay, the bird's in the cage, now the bird's not in the cage, without understanding what it meant. So this is for all of us. We can all do this. And sometimes we don't have a cranial compression. We sometimes just have to take a phonetic reading course to get that side strong, because our right side's too strong, and it just comes in all the time. And that's it. Yeah.
For phonetic abilities, would you agree if I said that in order to love, let's say, reading or love playing music, you would not want to convert into the phonetic mode? Basically, while playing music, for instance, you want to imagine the music or picture the music, like you were saying, like a movie.
Yeah.
And you really get into it and sort of love it, right?
Right, and you might be able to do that, even if, you could play music and that maybe, the picturing might still work there. You might simultaneously be able to play and picture, that I do little fun assessments with children. I'm trying to look at bilateral integration. I don't just look at cross-lateral skipping and jump roping. I do echo singing, something Waldorf does. So I sing a song, there's a tiny, oh boy, I'm hoarse from talking. I must have gotten down here. There's a tiny, oh, I can't do it. How am I going to do it? Higher? Or maybe lower. There's a tiny house. There we go. And I'm seeing that the child who's not known this song, that's from my childhood, can immediately echo it back. And the words and the rhythm of the words, there's a tiny house, is on one side, but the tune is on the other. So I see if they have bilateral integration, they'll go, there's a tiny house. Otherwise they'll go, there's a tiny house. They'll get the words, they might even get the rhythm, but the tune is not, there yet. So, and there's a lot of little things you can, do. But, so you're right. I mean, I think music, you might be able to do that, whether you're phonetic reading or sight reading.
Or any form of art, I would say.
Pardon?
Any form of art.
Probably, because it's a picturing that's a little, I would get pictures, I'm trying to think, when did the phonetic reading happened, it all happened around that 3rd year when all those other magical things happened. It was the first paper I wrote by reading books and not taking notes. It was the TV paper called Strangers in Our Home. I had to write it as a requirement to graduate, and I tried to get out of writing papers because they took forever. And I was planning to read all the books and bibliography again and take notes, because that was the only way I could write papers. It was a huge, laborious project. And Dora Butcher said, nope, if you want to graduate from the teacher training program next week, you have to turn in a paper and a presentation and an art project. And it was like, so I thought, darn it. And then I realized I actually knew these books, that I had switched and they were all in my memory. And it was unbelievable. I could actually start to write things down, all in a whole different way. And so that was my first realizing. And then I write articles. I had never done that prior to the teacher training program. I could not do that. I was the one that would have to read a book several times, try to write the book report right after I read it, take little note cards, write down key sentences, and then I have to change the words so you don't look like you plagiarize. There was no picturing, you guys, only if I manipulated things. Or music, singing. I love to sing. So who knows about all this? And I'm making it sound sort of more simplistic, but there's a simplistic part to it, and we just haven't figured this out yet, all the way as a country, but people are figuring it out. they call it whole word learning, the sight words. And then there's phonetic. And they used to think it didn't matter. And they wanted to teach reading so early. Well, the only kind of reading you could do is sight reading early. Phonetic reading requires this left side, and it's usually not finished myelinating till 7.5 to 9 years of age. And if there's some pressure there, then you may not be reading yet either. And if you happen to be very gifted intelligently, you're working on other things, so you're going to be later in reading, period. And if you have a more artistic, intuitive, huge right brain, you're going to work on that. So you may not come over here. So somewhere someone said, Steiner said we shouldn't even teach reading until children are 12. I haven't found that yet, but it actually makes sense that we can still read to them, have them copy sentences, so they have them write first, copy things from the board, not by memory, and let the reading come in. But you can always tell your child's phonetically reading because they sound out the word. And they want you, if they don't know the word, to sound it out for them. Sight reader will come to you and say, no, don't make me sound it out. Just tell me what the word is. Because they're memorizing it. That's it. Just tell me what the word is and what it means. So it's interesting. But these are the things I wrote back there so that parents can quickly find out about themselves, and teachers too, and the children. And the good news is you can develop, both sides have capacities. It's good to be able to sight read. It saves a lot of time. To know that you read a 5-page letter and somewhere in the middle of the 3rd page is for the things that the letter's asking you to do in a business. Do you want to read the whole 5 pages phonetically again when you already did? No, you scan it. Where's that part where they say the 3 things? Here it is. So it saves time, especially if you lose your place and don't use a bookmark. Yeah?
One question. So you were saying about the pressure that can be developed in a child if they cannot express the abilities. Would you agree that to release this pressure would be letting me do what he loves, and the other thing would be nature? Right?
Yes, so that's what I was saying. Anything that helps your mind and heart and body to be in the same place at the same time. So you're in nature, but you're not spinning your thoughts about, I'm so frustrated about what happened earlier this morning. You actually are in nature and noticing it. Just like in kindergarten and preschool, if the child is doing things they love and excited about what they're doing and then having thoughts about all the different bouncing of the ball, that by definition is present moment, and that opens compressions. So often I just will come and see a kindergarten, and if they're first year, maybe they're only scribbling and not drawing any stick figures yet, so I know proprioceptively they're blocked. Because usually by age 4 you have a full stick figure if you're not blocked, meaning you feel the muscles in your arms and legs, you feel muscles on your trunk. You may not feel your fingers yet. Sometimes you might draw 3 stick fingers because you feel the thumb and the baby, but these are merged. But then all of a sudden I come back to 2nd year of kindergarten, and they all of a sudden are drawing a stick figure now. So they've opened, with the work the family's doing and the school. But you're right, in nature, it will open. What I don't want, though, is unopened children coming into 1st grade. Because neurologically, they're expected to sit still in a chair and not wiggle, or they get in trouble. They're expected to start writing letters and numbers from the board and not reversing them. We shouldn't even have them do it by memory in 1st grade, even at Waldorf. We should have them copy until that system is built. You can tell because you can draw firmly letters and numbers on both sides of the back and across the middle. When proprioception is fully built, that child will make a mental image, only one, without a mirror image, and they'll draw for you on paper what you drew on their back. And until that time, I would ask them to write numbers and letters by memory and have them copy. But they do open up. But if I get a 1st grader and it's not open, then everything they do, especially in Waldorf, is going to be hard. Holding the pencil, they're going to have a lot of tension. Trying their eyes, that's the other thing that I talk about in the article. You always compress, I'll say always. I have not seen a child who's come to me with an unresolved cranial compression. I usually see it in their movement body. But they always have sustained visual tracking problems, and they can't pull their eyes symmetrically in and out. We call it eye convergence, which you need to do to copy from the board without having double images and blurry images. Because when you look at the board far away, my eyes are more in the middle, or my pupils are more in the middle of my eye. When I have to go close, they have to pull in. And it turns out the third brain nerve, the third cranial nerve, moves, there's two of them, and there's one that goes to the right eye and one that goes to the left eye. They move 4 out of the 6 eye muscles that move your eye. The other 2 muscles in your eye are innervated by 2 other nerves. Cranial nerve 4 and 6, they don't get blocked. Cranial 3 is the one that gets blocked. And cranial 3 does both the eye muscles that move the eye up, and it does the only eye muscle that pulls in. So if it's blocked, that nerve impulse is intermittent and the muscle gets weak. So all these children get sent to vision therapy to strengthen their eye muscles, but what they really need is they need the cranial therapy to take the pressure off the third nerve, and then you don't have to spend money for vision therapy. So that's the key. Same with OTPT. Maybe the child's not skipping, and then OTPT will work on something over and over and over again, teaching them by thinking, step, and then hop, which I can't do, step and then hop. And then the child can skip, but it's with huge effort. It's not mind-free. But if you open the pathways, because I always recommend that first. Anytime a child gets labeled with sensory integration problems or processing dysfunction, there's a cranial compression causing it. And if you get that open, you sometimes don't even need OTPT. But that's why I don't want that 7-year-old who neurologically is more like a 3-year-old having to try to play the flute in Waldorf, having to sit still, having to do circle time where they're supposed to be walking, judging the space so they don't bump into the person in front of them, the person behind them, and they're supposed to be either playing catch and feeling the ball with their fingers to catch it, or they're supposed to be clapping and they're supposed to be singing at the same time. You won't be able to do that if your proprioceptive systems are blocked or not developed. So those are the children I make sure will go to K. Weincheck, because I don't want them suffering. I don't want them thinking there's something wrong with them in first grade. I don't want them getting in trouble, popping out of their seat. Teachers saying, I can't handle this child. They're going to have to leave. But you're right about nature. It's so healing. And anything that we love is healing. There's a high school student that told me, because actually I saw her in college, but she said, I had all these issues, but what's really funny is I took a dance class that I really loved, and it was hard at first, but I loved it so much, meaning she was so present. She loved it, her body was moving, and her thoughts were only about what she was creating in the dance, and she said, I transformed. Something happened. I don't know what it was, but then I also noticed I could read a different way. And I could start, certain words, I could start sounding them out, without realizing. It was like an aha moment. That's what you're saying. So yes, doing what we love. Is integrating. Doing what we don't love will cause dis-ease and illness in our body and in our mental capacity because of the negative things we're telling ourselves about ourselves with all this stuff. So that's it. That's what I wanted to share. So thank you for letting me share. I learn every time I talk about it. That's why I have to give this lecture, because I'm still learning, you guys. And all these new thoughts were coming to me all day yesterday, actually even the week before. And even like, this article, I gotta remember to do this article, and bring it, because, it's interesting how this all works. We all learn from each other, yes.
So, kind of tail off what I was talking about, I'm curious about your journey from a parent
Yeah.
Parasympathetic nervous system activation, right? It'd be like the drop title to my autobiography.
Oh.
So what?
So this, you mean the parent that wasn't sympathetic drops to parasympathetic, right?
Yeah. Right.
I used fight flight because those other words are so darn confusing. You'd think sympathetic would mean you were more connected, and it's just like, this doesn't make sense. So, but neurologically they're different systems. So
What
fight
was that
flight.
journey like?
Pardon?
What was that journey like? How did you teach
Bushwhacking.
yourself? All right.
I mean, it felt like bushwhacking, and I felt like when I left UCSF, I had a faculty position, and they thought I was nuts. They thought I was having like a spiritual crisis, which I was. And they were like, what are you doing Waldorf? I mean, our psychologist at UCSF said that Waldorf was so strange because she went to the kindergarten, and they used desks to do crafts and to have snack, but they weren't sitting there learning their letters and writing, and the dolls didn't have faces on them. Sometimes they just had 2 eyes and no mouth. And she said they played with baskets of pine cones and sticks and silks, you know, and it was, oh my gosh, I mean, so what was it? It was that golden key.
But personally, how did you stop teaching your kid to be that way?
Oh, you mean my own child?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, he'll tell you it took a long, long time. I am so much of a better parent right now. He's 28. I'm still fine-tuning these things. I just wrote that article, 5 Good Things to Say to Your Child, because I spent the last 5 years intensely with my parents, and it was like reliving my whole childhood of like my whole self-esteem just felt like it got demolished. And so I came up with this article a couple of weeks ago. Like, what were the things I would have loved to hear as a child from my parents that they just weren't able to do, because my mom had never been praised, nor my dad. So they thought they would just praise us for absolutely everything. But that has the exact same effect of having kind of a low self-esteem. Because you really, why is this good? Why did I set the table and do a great job tonight, but how come tomorrow you didn't say I did a great job? Did I do something wrong? But I don't even know what it was that gave me a great job. You see the thing? You're constantly not sure. So that's why I thought, oh my gosh, we just need to be thankful. Thank you for setting the table today.
Well, actually, George Hoffaker taught me this a long time ago.
Yeah.
He said, be specific.
Yes.
Be specific.
Right.
And you're, like you were saying, the yellow napkins are so bright and beautiful.
Right.
Or,
Today.
that flower really goes well with the napkins.
Right.
What a good idea.
You guys, it took me all night to make that handout back there.
Yeah.
Because I thought of all the things, and I threw out the things. You were always so great, you always do such a great job. I decided you could maybe put the words, I usually will sometimes say good work, because if a child's really working hard, they're doing good work, even if it's hard what they didn't quite draw the triangle the way it was on the paper, but they worked at it. But it's still, so you'll see from that handout, it's been a long journey and it's still happening, you guys. I'm working hard. I have 2 kitties now, 2 little kittens. I'm working with them. They are my practice because grandchildren may be on the way. And I just want to be a much more centered, fun grandmother that's in the present moment and enjoys her child. I just went through those early years with my son, constantly, what am I not doing right? And I just wasn't present very often. Sometimes on vacations I was, on the beach. That finally would slow me down, but that's why. So I'm practicing on my kitty cats, a little bit. I mean, I'm practicing this. This is not easy for me to come up with specific, positive, And I practice on my son now too, and my daughter-in-law on the phone. Thank you, for bringing this wonderful salad for me. I was so in the mood for a salad. It was one they bought, so I didn't have to, otherwise I could tell them what I liked about the dressing. But it's a work in progress. So don't get frustrated with yourself. And you'll get one level of it, and then you'll realize, oh gosh, I missed this whole part. But you'll see when I spent a whole night thinking of all the wonderful things, or that I noticed that other parents were doing with their children. And then I'm like, yes, I would have loved to hear that. And that's how I came up with my entire list. So you can see whether there's things you would add or even things you might disagree with. But I had so much fun. I know my parents did the best they could. And they were trying so hard in their way to let us, to see us, in that way. But it was so funny that the same thing they felt, not being seen, I felt by these vague, always excellent, you always do such a great job. That's a terrible thing to say to a child. It puts such expectations. It puts a stress that I gotta always be excellent. Yeah.
So you had mentioned the review of the day,
Yes.
and it's really hard to do. The thing about not doing it, you're like, yeah, totally.
Yeah, right.
You know,
And
2
sometimes
minutes
my
is
day is
fine.
so chaotic, especially during some of these times with parents, I go, I'm not doing it the other day. Because I knew I wasn't present. It was too hard.
But it is pretty miraculous. If you can do, I don't know, 5 minutes of it, and just review your day, I'm telling you, you will see what happened. You will
Right.
see it and you'll go, oh,
Especially if you're trying to figure something out.
I know what to do differently next.
Yeah.
You will, because you'll see it. You'll go back and go,
It's
oh
amazing.
my gosh.
Sometime I saw a child move in my office and they tried to imitate the movement after they left and tried to figure out what it was. But when I did the review of the day that night, it's like you get help.
Yes.
Because all of a sudden it was
It's
like,
not as good.
oh. Yeah, you do get help. You do. I mean, I know enough now. You get help wherever you want to say it comes from. But so yeah, but it's a work in progress. So you take little baby steps and you strive. And if you can at least go 4 feet forward and just 3 back, you're gonna make it. You're gonna keep. It will change. And then life gets better when you're present, more present. Yeah. I don't know, nature, different things. It's miraculous. Things that must have happened around me that I never saw. And then you go out walking and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So, but I'm striving too. So I am the most present when I'm speaking with you and when I'm with families. I know that about myself. I'm in a different place. Time disappears. And then the rest of my life, I have to figure out how to get that to catch up, to do that. Yeah, I don't get stuck in my baggage stuff, But it's getting easier as I get older, so maybe that's a good thing.
So are my kids.
Hmm?
So are my kids.
Yeah.
I figure it out now.
No, I know,
So I don't
it's
know.
never too late. That's what my son has taught me, never. It's better, better now than never, but it really isn't too late. It's like they forgive you. And then you laugh at all these little things that you used to do when you were so not there. And your son can laugh with you. There's a lot of forgiveness in that way. It's the striving, and it's so amazing. I mean, my son last night said to me, it was about something he was dealing with, a kind of a distant relative who's creating a lot of stress, because the relative, I think, is getting Alzheimer's and not remembering the conversations that you have, and so it's pretty painful. But he just said, he goes, Mom, I'm so glad you were my mom. And I'm like, oh, thank you for saying that. I'm working on it, So, yeah, and I'm not perfect either. You go through hard times, you just keep striving.
Sounds like reality.
And ask for help. That's the other thing I've learned how to do. I used to think I could figure this out myself. I started surrendering and I asked for help at night. I sat there and put my brain and tried to figure everything out, my plan A to Z, like the CEO Diana, or the hat and the cat in the hat, with all the levels of hats. And I finally realized I don't know what the answer is, and I go to bed asking for help, just like for this. I need a star with words I said. I need a star to guide me. I was thinking of a story where the star's in the sky and you're a ship, and you need a guiding star. But I knew exactly what the star was when she wrote it on the board. I knew what it was because I so intently asked. And I'm finding the secret is ask first before I even try to figure it out myself. That's some funny thing. It's a pride thing, but I think it's also, I thought I had to be worthy to ask. Now your key is ask first. Just ask, and sometimes it will come as a word. It may be a stranger the next day that shows you something. It may be one of your friends that suddenly calls you up and says something. That's what I've experienced, so I don't know.
be a speaker. She
Yeah.
Oak Waldorf School.